Welcome, children of Kinnereth and other faiths. Today...
The pain is so great.
Not right now, please. Today, we bird. I've been playing Skyrim for as long as it's been around, and it's such an expansive world with so much to see, but one thing I didn't notice until I picked it up again, like 3 years ago, was just how few birds there are. It's something I only noticed because that's about the time I started birding in real life, and that interest ended up transferring to video games. Now, I'm far from the first person to note the lack of birds. There's mods dedicated to them, though I've never used any because I've been a console player most of my life. But I want to explore Skyrim, the special edition, to see exactly what Skyrim gives us in canon in terms of birds. There's a lot to get into, so I'm separating my research into 3 categories: visual, audible, and textual/miscellaneous. Chickens in Skyrim are a lot like our chickens. They're domesticated birds kept for their eggs and meat, and they're usually found around towns and cities, though I don't quite know how you get the meat from them, considering the townspeople response to trying to kill one. In case you didn't know, like I didn't, there are different kinds of chicken breeds. I think this one most closely resembles the Catalana in the Orpington, but it seems like real Catalanas have black tails. Orpington chickens aren't too different in color, but they are a very fluffy breed, and they have brown eggs instead of white. So we'll just call it a hybrid. The chickens exhibit very common foraging behavior, like scratching the ground, searching the ground, and pecking. The only other things I've seen them do is walking, sitting, and shaking their heads. They have nests made of straw, but they never sit on them, and they tend to stick to a very small area of land. In terms of interactability, the chicken cannot be moved by the player, like at all. They're as cemented as a rock. But if you block the way a chicken is walking, it will change course based on that, which is about the only non-violent evidence that they know you exist. Or that they exist. Speaking of violence, not that I would ever be violent to a bird, but they only make noise when attacked. That was not a punch, it was a love tap. Another thing to note, all chickens look the same, so you wouldn't be able to walk around and be like, oh, that one's a rooster and that one's a hen, which leads me to question. Are there any male chickens at all? Is that why they don't sit on their eggs, because they know they're not fertilized? Do all male chickens just look exactly like female chickens? Or do the chickens in this world reproduce asexually? Too many unanswered chicken questions. Hawks can be found flying around many different places in Skyrim, including forests, cities, mountains. I've even found some underground. All of them fly in a set path in the air that they never stray away from, and many will usually eventually land and sit in their nests. And that's pretty much all they do. Fly in the set path, and sit in their nests. They also don't make any noise, and all of them look the same. There's not much interesting about them, but they are very strong. Much like a chicken, a hawk isn't a bird in and of itself, it's a type of bird. So you have like red-tailed hawks, Eurasian sparrowhawks, common black hawks, etc. I know we're in Skyrim, so they can kind of just do whatever they want, but I don't like that, so I'm gonna identify it. To me, this most closely resembles a red-shouldered hawk. They both have reddish, shoulder areas as well as a red body, but their tails and the primary and secondary feathers on their wings have these alternating white and black lines. And if you compare their feathers, they look pretty similar. Even their eggs look similar. Speaking of which, the fact that they have nests is strange, especially when you consider the fact that there are no eggs in them. The only nests that have eggs are the ones on top of the custom-built houses from the DLC Hearthfire. I used to think that nests were just like bird homes, but nests exist specifically to lay eggs and raise young. They don't like sleep or hang out in them when they don't have kids. That's not to say it never happens, but it's pretty uncommon. However, red-shouldered hawks are known to use the same nest year after year, so it's possible they're just keeping an eye on it. Keeping it safe from all the other birds. The eggs Hearthfire added also have the same alchemical effects as a chicken's egg, so it really makes me wonder why they bothered to add it in the first place, especially in such a weirdly specific circumstance. And you know what else? This is one of the only creatures in the game that can't be soul trapped. And if you use a detect life spell, they aren't included as living. How disrespectful is that? What, you're saying birds don't have souls? Or is it just hawks? Are you discriminating against hawks? The Felsad Tern was added as a part of the Dragonborn DLC and can only be found on Solstheim. Well, technically they could be found elsewhere, but they don't exist on Skyrim. Their build is exactly the same as a hawk's, but their coloration is clearly different. I do like that they aren't just called terns and instead have a specific name, but terns in real life are seabirds, and they look very different to this. They are very angular and slim in their appearance, and they have these distinct forked tails, long thin beaks, and they're not as big as hawks. Technically, it's possible for a tern to not have these features as it's seen in the brown noddy, but that's more of an exception rather than the rule. Terns tend to have a distinct way of being colored, which the Felsad Tern actually did do a good job of doing, having a lighter body and darker head. In all other ways in game, they're pretty identical to the hawks, except they don't have any nests or eggs or beaks to loot. Bonehawks are, I would say, the most unique of all the birds in Skyrim, though that's not really saying much. They were added as a part of the Dawnguard DLC and can only be found flying around Castle Volkihar. These are the kind of birds I would more expect from a fantasy video game. They're completely made up and unique in their appearance, but based on a bird that we really have, which in this case is a hawk. Their base build is clearly the same as a hawk's, but they added a few things to distinguish them, namely being the skull head and the feathers along their wings and tails. I don't really know what purpose these feathers would serve, but hey, I just like that they did something different. You can loot feathers off of them, but they're also the only birds that drop claws and skulls. However, there's apparently no use for the claws even alchemically, and the only use for the feathers and the skull is to create a bone amulet, which, don't get me wrong, is pretty cool and the kind of thing I'd like to see more of, but on the other hand, there's nothing fun about killing birds. You didn't think I was killing these birds, did you? I'm just stunning them with the paralyze spell and sending them on their way. Shame on you. Speaking of dead birds, there's a lot of them. Well, specifically, there's a lot of dead pheasants. And I mean, these things are everywhere. Inns, houses, shops. I don't know where they're getting all of them though, because I can't find one alive anywhere. And there's no other signs of their existence except for their dead bodies and meat. Like there are no pheasant eggs or feathers or nests or anything. And once again, we have a bird that is a type of bird and not a specific bird. This is a ringneck pheasant. I don't think I need to go into why, it's pretty obvious. When you're first starting the game, the expectation is that you're very quickly going to end up in Riverwood and then take the bridge over the river to traverse the mountains, which is why they have programmed this flurry of birds to greet you and make the world feel more alive. Feels a bit like a false advertisement of what to expect in terms of birds, but hey, not my circus. The birds happen very fast, so it's hard to get a good look at them, but there is one actually stuck in the tree by the river, which is where you can see that it's very obviously a red-winged blackbird. But they did do something crazy to the beak. I don't know what's going on with that. The sizing on these guys as well. I mean, in the real world, this guy would fit into this guy's belly. Another victim of Skyrim's giganticism problem. What I do like, though, is that this event happens so close to the water because red-winged blackbirds are typically found near water sources. Specifically, they're most associated with marshes, but really they're found near any water sources. I also like that there's so many of them because they tend to stay in loose groups. Also, this is not the only instance where you can find these birds. You can also see them on your way to being executed. Lovely view. And there's at least one more spot where they spawn, which is on a tree at the river near Lakeview Manor. The pine thrush is one of two birds in this game that you can find nests and eggs for, but no evidence of the bird itself. Pine thrushes are not a real type of bird, but a thrush is a real type of bird, and there's even one called a wood thrush, which I would assume is closest to a pine thrush, but there's no real way to tell. Their nests are found in mostly foresty regions, which makes sense given the name. Their eggs are very reddish brown, which is interesting because I looked up thrush eggs and most of them are bluish green. I was checking thrush after thrush and I couldn't find a single one that looked like this, but it's possible I just missed it. Although, something to note is that thrushes are susceptible to brood parasites like the brown-headed cowbird. If you don't know what a brood parasite is, it's basically a type of bird that tricks other birds into raising their young by laying their eggs in their nests. So like in this picture, we have wood thrush eggs mixed in with what look like cowbird eggs. Now, it's definitely not an exact match, but I would say the pine thrush eggs look more similar to the cowbird's eggs than they do the wood thrush. So we have to consider the possibility that maybe these eggs aren't actually pine thrushes and the people of Skyrim got tricked just as easily as the pine thrushes themselves. The other bird we never really see is a rock warbler, which actually is real. This is actually a really fun bird to add to the mix in theory because it's way more unique than the other birds they've added. They don't look particularly special, but they have a lot of fun facts associated with them. Like the fact that they only live near the sandstone formations in New South Wales, Australia, which is a very small area in the grand scheme of things. They like to hop around rocks looking for food, and their nests are described as suspended dome-shaped structures made from roots, moss, grass, and bark bound together with spiderwebs and has a round side entrance that is sometimes hooded. I don't know, I'm not trying to glaze this bird or anything, but this is just really interesting to me, and a very niche bird to include. And then in Skyrim we have... it's a regular nest. I will give them a few points though for only being able to find them near rocks. Real rock warbler eggs are described as white with apricot wash when fresh with very faint sparse reddish brown spotting, whereas in the game they're greenish blue with brown spotting, so I don't know what happened there. Alright, I just need to start this section by saying that this was really, really difficult. Between Skyrim's loud-ass wind muffling the bird sounds, and the birds singing on top of each other, and trying to identify every bird by searching things like birds that sound like ZZZZ, and every bird having several different sounds it could be making that sound like other birds, it was a nightmare. I almost gave up. But then I was like, wait, I'm gonna come on here and claim to present all things bird to you, and then go, sorry guys, couldn't identify these. I'd be a laughingstock. A fool. and you came here because you need to know about the birds of Skyrim. So I developed a system to deliver as accurate of identification as possible. I found 3 different bird identification applications that use sound ID to determine what bird is making what noise. Whenever all 3 agreed on an ID, I'd feel pretty confident that it was right. And when they didn't agree, I'd try to use my own judgment to see which seemed right. You can take this section as not as canon as the others, because while I tried my best, there's definitely some mistakes in here. But hey, don't blame me. Blame the machines. When playing, I noticed that they actually do include different bird sounds depending on what area you're in, which was not a detail I expected, but I really appreciated. So because of that, I'm going to divide the identifying by the area. Let's start with our typical pine forest. I singled out 11 bird calls in total. So we have the black-capped chickadee, Bachman's sparrow, American goldfinch, indigo bunting, blue jay, American robin, northern cardinal, Steller's jay, Carolina wren, Eurasian three-toed woodpecker, and the great horned owl. Next, we have the perpetually fall forest, where I identified 8 total birds: the Carolina wren, house wren, common chaffinch, Eurasian blackbird, song sparrow, Bell's vireo, American crow, and the mourning dove. The marshes have the most unique sounding birds, as I imagine they were trying to sound very creepy. I noticed 4: long-tailed manakin, marsh wren, Sinaloa wren, and the black-headed trogon. Lastly, we have these snow-covered areas, where I was only able to identify about 1, and that was the Carolina chickadee. And if you're wondering, well, what about the plains or the rocky areas near Markarth or even Solstheim? I checked every different area in this game countless times, and I didn't hear any birds in any of those areas. I'm not sure if that's a glitch or purposeful, but that is what happened. I'm a novice birder, but one thing you have to do to get better at birding is to do your research, which usually involves reading. So I went ahead and read every single book in Skyrim. And I mean every book. Every journal, every letter. The only things I didn't read were the CC content, because I know that it's kind of a gray area in terms of whether or not everything in it is canon. From what I can tell, there's a total of 58 books that reference birds in some capacity, whether that be a specific bird or a half-bird monster or even just the word bird. Several of these books confirm the existence of birds we've never seen in game. Even if the book in reference is dated a long time ago or takes place elsewhere other than Skyrim and Solstheim, I think it's worth noting what they have canonized in terms of the Elder Scrolls as a whole. 2920 Volume 12 Evening Star potentially confirms the existence of a bird known as a Pinedonian swallowtail in Cyrodiil. In our world, a swallowtail is a type of butterfly, but we do have one bird called a swallow-tailed kite, as well as a type of bird called a swallow. But given that the text describes this creature as sweeping through the air, singing their songs, I'm wagering that this is a bird. In A Dance in Fire Volume 1, our main character, Scotty, notes hearing the cry of seabirds on the ocean to the west of him as he's crossing into Valenwood. Now, this isn't a specific bird, but it is important to me that it confirms seabirds in general are canon, considering we see none in Skyrim and like 1 in Solstheim. Scotty is deeper in Valenwood in A Dance in Fire Volume 4, when he finds himself hiding with another man in a giant abandoned bird's nest. There's no identifying information as to what this bird is, but it tells us that birds way bigger than 2 full-grown men existed at some point. Multiple books reference eagles as well as ravens, though they don't say what kind. In The Wolf Queen Volume 5, Potama is said to be eating something called a jalf bird while in Cyrodiil. We can only speculate what this would look like since it's an Elder Scrolls specific creation, but I like to think it looked like a dodo bird. The sentence, "The town guard spied a pack of carrion birds circling near the road," can be found in Runil's journal. If you don't know what carrion is, it refers to the decaying flesh of dead animals. So carrion birds are birds that feast on already dead animals. A common example of one would be really any type of vulture. However, technically hawks and eagles also eat carrion, and based on what we see in Skyrim ourselves, they do literally just circle in the air all day. But I went out and killed a bunch of different kinds of meat and waited to see if a bird would appear, and lo and behold, nothing. Which is especially odd considering this diary entry is dated so close to the start of the game. So we can't know for sure what bird he's referring to, but I personally think he's referring to a vulture. A location known as Fort Snowhawk is both found on the map and mentioned in the Stormcloak missive. It could just be a random mashing of words, but I'll take any evidence of a new bird that I can get. The book Physicality of Werewolves makes no mentions of birds, but the first letter is illustrated with a bird that to me looks a lot like a heron because of its distinctly long neck and beak. Speaking of werewolves and birds, the book Lycanthropic Legends of Skyrim actually tells us about a race of werevultures that are or were causing chaos in Valenwood. This is especially intriguing to me because it has to be wondered, how did this creature come into existence? I mean, what exactly created it? Much like how I feel about hagravens, though we do get slightly more context on them, but not much. One of the loading screens tells us that hagravens are specifically a conjoining of woman and bird, and the book Herbane's Bestiary, Hagravens, tells us almost human, but more of an abomination of woman and creature fused together, nothing more than a husk of humanity surrendered in exchange for possession of the powers of dark magic. However, none of this tells us the origins or even what the ritual entails. In the quest for penitence, you learn the ritual to transform involves a human sacrifice, but there are no other real indications of what you need because everything you can find here you can find at a regular hagraven's nest. So no clue if there's a god specifically granting them this power, and why it's a bird they're fused with when there doesn't seem to be any birds involved in the sacrifice. And speaking of half-bird, half-woman creatures, harpies are also real, as they're referenced in notes on racial phylogeny. But that's all there is, just a name. But half-bird monsters isn't where it ends. 2920 Second C talks about a woman seeing an ancient elf species known as the Aeliad transform from a bird to an elf. While this is clearly a reference to the power of shape-shifting, even further back in time, there's a record of bird people existing near Cyrodiil who were discovered by Topal the pilot, indicated in Father of the Niben. These bird people were described as glorious colored feathered men with taloned feet. They were immediately able to speak the words of the Aldmer, but they didn't understand what they were saying. They were merely parroting back what they heard. So Topal the pilot stayed and taught them the language as well as how to write with their talons. This is the only record of these birdmen having existed, and it's suggested that they were wiped out by the ancient Khajiit. It's really unfortunate, but I suppose it's the way of nature. Some books give us some historical insight into the use of birds as more than just a background piece. It's revealed that messages were at least at one point in time delivered by Nighthawk in The Real Baron Zaya Volume 5. Technically, we have a bird called a nighthawk, but it's not an actual type of hawk and rather belongs to the nightjar family. Based on fantasy tropes, we can assume that the bird in reference is a type of hawk, but it's unclear if a nighthawk is actually its own special species in Tamriel, or if it's just a term to describe a job. But regardless, it's showing us a bird being used as a messenger. Hawks were also used during the war in Rizlav the Righteous, when Rizlav sends his army a signal by sending his hawk flying into the sky. The use of birds in communications is referenced again in the Song of Pelennor Volume 4, where Perif's falconers had sent for the Nords. This doesn't detail exactly how they did it, whether the falcons carried notes to deliver like the Nighthawk, or if they flew to the Nords and signaled in the sky for them to follow them. But it's the only mention of bird jobs we get in Tamriel. But the most interesting aspect of everything I read was the relationship between gods and birds. For instance, blackbirds seem to mean something to Mehrunes Dagon, because in the Mythic Dawn commentaries they are mentioned twice, where devotion and worship of him involves birth by blackbirds. In Purloined Shadows, the Daedric Prince Nocturnal is summoned on her holy day by witches and is met with clouds of crows circling overhead and many more crows sitting on the tree behind her, transfixed by Nocturnal. The Tree of Crows literally referred to as her throne. Her association with birds goes further by her dedicated cult being called the Nightingales, with their symbol being a bird holding a moon. She is also one of the few you actually meet, and when you do, she enters and exits through a flurry of what I can only assume are either blackbirds or crows. Not to mention her statue literally having birds on it. According to the book The Myths of Sheogorath, everyone's favorite Daedric Prince of Madness, he is said to have invented music when he realized that mortals could never make the beautiful and inspired calls of birds. His adoration is shown again in the 16 Accords of Madness Volume 6, when he proposes a duel with Hircine, where two beasts of their choosing will battle it out. Hircine uses a huge, deadly monster, and Sheogorath shows up with a tiny, colorful bird. Sheogorath actually wins this fight, and the book ends with this line: Sheogorath beckoned the minuscule songbird to perch atop his shoulder and strolled down the mountain, making for the warm breezes and vibrant sunsets of the Abyssinian coast, whistling in tune with the tiniest champion in Tamriel. And frankly, that's fucking cute. I know that Sheogorath chose this bird specifically to mess with Hirusin in the worst way possible. But it seems to me with this last line and the invention of music that the god of madness might actually have a soft spot for birds. These three bird and god associations are interesting, but now is where things get real meaty. Because in the varieties of faith in the Empire, we have a god specifically referred to as the bird god and the spirit of air. Her name is Tava. This is from the Red Guard's pantheon, but as indicated in the same passage, she has become assimilated into the mythology of Kinnereth. Kine, Kinnereth, and Tava are all different versions of the same god. This is actually referenced in the Dragon War, when it talks of how Ysgramor brought with him a faith that worshipped animal gods, which it turns out were mostly just the same gods in the form of animal totems. Two of these totems were birds. Junal, now known as Julianos, was represented by the owl to indicate wisdom. Kine is represented by the hawk, as she is the goddess of the storm and the wind. The entirety of these ancient tombs were built around the Nordic pantheon of gods, with what seems like to me an emphasis on birds. There isn't much about Junal in lore, but there is a lot about Kine and Kinnereth. She is extremely important to Nords because she essentially gave them life. They literally consider themselves to be children of the sky because the sky exhaled the north winds on the land and formed them, with the sky referring to Kine. I think the abundance of bird architecture in Windhelm is proof of that. It is the first city in Skyrim, built by Ysgramor and his people. And if you pay attention while you're walking around, there is bird imagery everywhere, and specifically a very hawk-looking bird. All major cities in Skyrim have their own distinct style, so it doesn't seem like a coincidence that hawks are so ingrained in this one. But even some of the standard furniture that can be found everywhere has bird-like pieces. Whiterun was founded by the crew of Joravaskr, and while their architecture is more horse and dragon focused, the history of why they settled there is significant. When the crew arrived and killed and captured a bunch of elves, they found this giant bird monument whose eyes and beak were opened in flame. Side note, I don't know why they didn't actually have the eyes and beak open in flame because that would have been sick. Anyway, when they captured these elves, they asked why they didn't use this great land that was fit for harvest. And it turns out those elves were terrified of that bird. This monument we now know as the Skyforge was older than the elves themselves and became known to hold magic as old as Nirn itself. In the Songs of the Return Volume 7, it is said to most likely be a remnant of the gods' attempt to create paradise in Mundus. So this could have literally been made by Kine herself. Of course, Whiterun is also home to the Gildergrain, which is sacred to Kine, as there's a whole quest about it. And it's this tree that inspired the building of the Temple of Kinnereth, which of course has a mosaic bird on its floor and one of her shrines that all resemble a bird, and it's located in what is called the Wind District of Whiterun. So after all of this deep diving into the canon birds of Skyrim, and with his newfound understanding of just how integral Kinnereth, the god most closely associated with birds, is to Skyrim, it begs the question, where are they? We identified a ton of birds, hopefully correctly, and the sounds all across Skyrim, and we found nests and eggs, but we only actively see like 6. And not to mention, none of the eggs we come across are ever being taken care of. All the pheasants we find are dead, the red-winged blackbirds only seem to come out of 2 trees, and the birds also seem to have next to no survival instincts. So my mind went crazy with theories. Are all the birds I heard really just insects within the Elder Scrolls lore? Like sure, they're birds in real life, but technically they can make the sounds be whatever they want, so maybe they're insects. Are all the birds invisible? If so, when did that happen, and does anybody know about it? Is the Dragonborn just canonically really bad at bird watching? Like with everything they can do, the one thing they can't do is spot birds. Or maybe they fly faster than mortals' eyes can detect them. Are the birds all gold medalists at hiding despite there being a serious lack of hiding spaces? Or is it something more sinister like a mass extinction going on that nobody seems concerned about? Are the gods punishing the mortals for all the strife between them? I mean, with that theory, it would explain why the only significant birds in Skyrim are hawks, since they're connected to Kine. Like, maybe she's using them as a way to watch over everything. Like, they're not even really birds, they're more just portals. It would also explain why they can't be soul-trapped if they're not even really birds and instead just windows for Kine. Truthfully, I don't know, and I doubt we'll ever get a canonical answer. But before we go, I do want to mention some bird incorporations that I would have loved to have seen. Firstly, I think the presence of hawks are underutilized. We saw in the books that birds of prey are often used as messengers, and I think a really cool way to get quests in Skyrim would have been shooting down a hawk that was en route somewhere and gaining a quest from the letter they were carrying, or even just non-quest related lore. I think both the Imperials and the Stormcloaks should have had bird they used as scouts. Like the Imperials could have used falcons and the Stormcloaks could have used hawks, and whenever you were visiting one of their campsites you would see their bird flying up overhead. Also, birds related to a god's given mythology could be sitting around their shrines. It would be a great way for their shrines to feel more alive and creepy like the way it should when you're around an immortal being. Perfect example being live crows and nightingales being on Nocturnal Shrine, and blackbirds lining Mehrunes Dagon. It would have been really fun if at least one inn had domesticated a songbird to sing with the bard, like a little musical duo. It would have been a nice homage to the myths of Sheogorath, and also just really cute. But in general, variety is the key. Seabirds on the seashore, songbirds in the trees, owls at night. And what I would have loved most of all are fantasy birds created specifically for the Elder Scrolls. We're in a fantasy land after all. Let's get crazy with it. Alright, well thank you so much for watching. If you noticed anything that I didn't or anything that I got wrong, please let me know. But I hope you go forth and notice the birds. May Kinnereth's winds blow you to fortune. Bet you never seen a priestess of Kinnereth do this.